She had written the message 17 times, not 17 different messages. The same message, just 17 different versions of it. Some were angry, some were gentle, some sounded like goodbye. One simply said, "I just want to understand why." That was the sentence she could never send, because after everything that happened, Emma didn't want him back. She didn't want another relationship. She didn't even want an apology anymore. She wanted an explanation. Why did you change? Why did you stop loving me? Why did you promise you'd stay when you already knew you were leaving? Why did you make me believe everything was okay? And most of all, why did you leave without giving me the chance to understand? For almost 2 years, Emma believed the answer was somewhere inside him. She thought that if he explained himself, the memories would finally settle. The night he left would make sense. The unanswered messages would make sense. The silence would make sense. She believed closure was something another person gave you. Then, one night, she found something in an old drawer that made her question everything. It wasn't a message from him. It was the last message she had never sent. The relationship had ended without a proper ending. That was the problem. There had been no final conversation, no sitting across from each other, no explanation, no moment where both people said what they needed to say. One day, Daniel was there. The next, he wasn't. He had said he needed space. Then he stopped responding. A week became 2. 2 became a month. Emma sent messages. "Are you okay?" Then, "Can we please talk?" Then, "I don't understand what happened." Then finally, "If you don't want to be with me anymore, just tell me." Nothing. No answer. Just silence. And silence can become cruel when your mind is desperate for information, because when someone tells you the truth, even a painful truth, your mind has something to hold. But when someone disappears without explaining, your mind creates its own answers. Emma created hundreds. Maybe he met someone else. Maybe she wasn't attractive enough. Maybe she had been too demanding. Maybe he had stopped loving her months earlier. Maybe every happy memory had been a lie. She investigated the relationship like it was a crime scene. Every conversation became evidence. Every photograph became a clue. Every old message became something she could examine. She wasn't trying to get him back. She was trying to understand what had happened to her. One rainy afternoon, Emma found the notebook. It was small, black. The cover was bent from years of being carried around. She remembered it immediately. She had used it during the last 6 months of the relationship. She hadn't opened it since. She sat on the floor beside her bed. For a while, she simply held it. Then she opened the first page. There were grocery lists, meeting notes, little reminders, and then she found something unexpected, a sentence written in her own handwriting. "Something feels wrong." Emma stared at it. The date was 6 months before Daniel left. She turned the page. "He seems far away." Another page. "I asked him if everything was okay. He said yes." Another. "Maybe I'm imagining it." Emma stopped, because suddenly the story she had been telling herself for 2 years began to change. She had always believed the breakup had come out of nowhere. It hadn't. Her body had noticed something long before her mind was willing to admit it. She had felt the distance. She had asked about it. She had been reassured, then dismissed, then left. The closure she had been searching for might not be hidden in the final conversation. It might have been hiding in everything she had already known. That night, Emma called her friend Sarah. "Do you remember when I used to say something was wrong?" Sarah laughed softly. "Of course. Why didn't you tell me I was right?" Sarah went quiet, then said, "Because you didn't want to hear it." Emma closed her eyes. Sarah continued, "You kept saying he was just stressed. You kept saying things would get better. Maybe I should have tried harder. No, the answer came immediately. You tried too hard. Emma didn't respond. Sarah said, You kept trying to create closeness with someone who was already creating distance. The words hurt. But they also explained something. Emma had spent 2 years believing she had been abandoned suddenly. Maybe the abandonment had happened slowly. Maybe the relationship had been ending long before the goodbye. And perhaps the cruelest part was that she had been there for all of it, without knowing how to name it. Still, one question remained. Why hadn't Daniel simply told her? Why couldn't he have said, I don't love you anymore? Why couldn't he have given her one honest conversation? That question followed Emma for weeks, until one evening she found an old photograph. The two of them were sitting at a restaurant. Daniel was smiling. Emma remembered the night. She remembered thinking they were happy. But now she looked more carefully. Daniel was smiling at the camera. His eyes weren't. She zoomed in. Then she laughed sadly. She had spent 2 years asking what she had missed. The answer was everywhere. She just hadn't wanted the answer to be true. Because sometimes closure hurts precisely because it confirms what we were hoping wasn't happening. Emma began reading her notebook from the beginning. She found more entries. I don't feel heard. I apologized again. I don't know why I keep feeling guilty. I think I'm becoming afraid to ask questions. And then one sentence made her stop. I miss who I am when I'm not worried about him. Emma put the notebook down. That sentence was written before the breakup, before the silence, before the unanswered messages, before she started blaming herself. And suddenly, she understood. She had been waiting for Daniel to explain why the relationship ended. But perhaps the more important question was, why did I stay so long after I stopped feeling safe? That question didn't excuse what he had done. It didn't make the abandonment acceptable. But it gave Emma something Daniel never had. An answer she could actually use. There's a strange thing about closure. We imagine it as a conversation. 2 people sitting across from each other. One speaks. The other finally understands. An apology, an explanation, a final goodbye. But real life doesn't always give us that scene. Sometimes the person who hurt you doesn't understand the damage. Sometimes they don't regret it. Sometimes they rewrite the story. Sometimes they move on before you've even understood what happened. And sometimes they simply never come back. That doesn't mean your story has to remain unfinished. It means you may have to stop waiting for the person who caused the wound to become the person who heals it. Months later, Emma received an unexpected message. Daniel. Her hands went cold. The message was short. I know I owe you an explanation. Emma stared at the screen. For 2 years, she had dreamed of seeing those words. Now that they were finally there, she wasn't sure she wanted to open the door. Another message arrived. I was afraid. Then, I didn't know how to tell you I had changed. Then, I handled it badly. Emma read everything. Her heart raced. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The explanation, the reason, the missing piece. And yet, something strange happened. She didn't feel healed. She felt tired, because the explanation didn't change what happened. It didn't erase the nights she spent crying. It didn't return the time she had lost. It didn't undo the years she spent believing she was the problem. It simply gave a name to something she already knew. He had been afraid. He had changed. He didn't know how to communicate it. And he had chosen silence. That was the truth. Painful, ordinary, human, and somehow not powerful enough to control her anymore. Emma typed a response, then deleted it. Typed another, deleted that too. Finally, she wrote, "Thank you for telling me." She stopped, then added, "I hope you're well." She didn't ask him why. She didn't ask whether he had ever loved her. She didn't ask if he regretted leaving. She didn't ask whether there had been someone else. Not because those questions didn't matter. They simply didn't belong to her anymore. She sent the message, put the phone down, and waited for the feeling. Nothing dramatic happened. No tears, no relief, no sudden peace, just silence. But this silence was different. 2 years ago, silence had meant abandonment. Tonight, silence meant choice. She was no longer waiting for an answer. That night, Emma took the black notebook and placed it beside her bed. She opened to the final page. Then she wrote, "I wanted closure from you." She paused. But what I really wanted was proof that I wasn't imagining my own pain. She continued, "I wasn't." Her hand stopped. Then, I knew something was wrong. And finally, I don't need you to agree with my memory for it to be true. She closed the notebook. That sentence felt different. Because for years, she had believed another person's explanation was necessary to validate her experience. It wasn't. You don't need the person who hurt you to admit they hurt you before your pain becomes real. You don't need their apology to prove that what happened mattered. You don't need their version of events to trust what you lived through. And you don't need them to understand your heartbreak in order to heal from it. If you're listening to this because someone left you without the closure you deserved, there may still be a part of you waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for the apology, waiting for the message that finally explains everything, waiting for them to say, "It wasn't your fault." Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But please don't put your life on hold for words that may never arrive. You are allowed to close a door that someone else refused to close properly. You are allowed to stop checking, stop rereading, stop imagining conversations, stop rehearsing what you would say if they came back. And you are allowed to heal even if they never understand what they did. Closure doesn't always sound like an apology. Sometimes it sounds like, "I know what happened to me." Sometimes it sounds like, "I don't need to investigate the past anymore." And sometimes it is simply, "I believe myself." Emma still kept the notebook, but she didn't hide it. She placed it on the bookshelf. It contained the version of herself who had been confused, afraid, hopeful, heartbroken. She didn't hate that woman anymore. She understood her. That woman had loved someone. She had trusted someone. She had believed promises. And when those promises disappeared without explanation, she had tried to find a reason. There was nothing foolish about that. The human mind hates unfinished stories. It wants endings. It wants reasons. It wants the final sentence. But some stories don't give us one. Sometimes the person walks away before the last chapter. And eventually, you learn to write the ending yourself. If these stories have been keeping you company during the nights when your mind refuses to be quiet, subscribe to this channel. Stay here for the nights when you need a calm voice instead of another empty piece of advice. For heartbreak you can't explain. For people who left without saying goodbye. For memories that return when the lights go out. For the questions that keep you awake long after everyone else has gone to sleep. Subscribe before you leave, and come back whenever you need somewhere quiet to put down what you've been carrying. You don't have to have everything figured out. You don't have to be completely healed. You only have to keep going, one night at a time, one memory at a time, one quiet breath at a time. Years later, Emma found the black notebook while moving apartments. She opened it. The old sentences were still there. Something feels wrong. I miss who I am when I'm not worried about him. I don't know why I keep feeling guilty. She smiled. Then she reached the final page. I believe myself. Emma remembered writing it. She remembered how much courage it had taken. And now she realized something. The closure hadn't arrived in Daniel's message. It hadn't arrived when he finally admitted he was afraid. It hadn't arrived when he said he was sorry. It had arrived much earlier, the night she stopped asking someone else to explain her own experience. She had wanted him to tell her why he left. Instead, she had learned why she needed to leave the question behind. And maybe that's what closure really is. Not getting the perfect explanation. Not hearing the apology you deserved. Not making the other person understand. It is reaching the point where the unanswered question no longer controls your tomorrow. You can still wonder, but you don't have to wait. You can still remember, but you don't have to return. You can still wish things had ended differently, but you don't have to live inside that wish. Because some people will never give you the ending you deserved, and that is deeply unfair. But your life doesn't have to remain unfinished because they refused to finish the conversation. You can close the book, not because the story didn't matter, because it did. You can close it because you have read enough. You know what happened. You know what it cost you. You know what you learned. And most importantly, you know who you are now. Emma closed the notebook, placed it back on the shelf, turned off the light, and went to bed. There was no message waiting, no apology, no explanation, no final conversation, just quiet. But this time, the quiet didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like peace, and maybe tonight, you can let it be that way for you too. You don't need one more answer before you are allowed to sleep. You don't need someone else's permission to believe your own story. You don't need closure from the person who closed the door. Sometimes, you become the closure, and sometimes, the most peaceful ending is simply realizing that you no longer need to know why. You only need to know that you're ready to keep living. So let the unanswered questions rest tonight. Let the old conversations rest. Let their silence belong to them, and let tomorrow belong to you. The story ended, but you didn't, and that is enough.